Okay. All right. I want to welcome Rabbi Aron for our final in our fourth in our series of four talks that we've had from our clergy this year. And the bar gets higher with every talk because you all have done such a great job. So Aron, the standards are very high right now. And without further ado, you've already been introduced. So welcome and take it away.
Yeah, I think it's a great way of entering the fourth in the series of high holiday preparations by saying there's no pressure. Seeing as for a lot of us, this is that time of that year when we start to feel that pressure, whether it's
a lot of pressure
coming from external sources or self-imposed. But tonight we'll have a great time. So I do want to thank Lee and everybody else for helping to put together this series and for all the support going into it. And what we're going to do tonight is take a look in depth at one of the key prayers of the High Holiday service. And we're going to sort of challenge some traditional understandings and see if we can open up some newer understandings based on close readings of the text. So if it's okay with you, I say let's just get right to it. I don't need to waste more time with introductions. And so here we have. Are you seeing here? It says, "Who will live and who will pray?"
Yes.
Okay, cool. So I've been singing this Leonard Cohen song in my head a lot. "Who by fire," right? It's the whole thing. The famous song, and it comes actually from this poem, this prayer. This Unetaneh Tokef is the biggest theme of the day. And so let's just get right to it here. I put it up on the screen. This is so you can see the way it looks in the Machzor. Don't worry, we'll do a zoom in. But for now, for those who don't know it by the name of Unetaneh Tokef, which are in rabbinic, classic rabbinic fashion, we give things the names by the first word. So the prayer begins with Unetaneh Tokef, right? Look at the awesomeness of the day, Kedushat Hayom. But really, this is the part that people tend to remember. Rosh Hashanah yikatevun Yom Kippur yechatemun. Right? On Rosh Hashanah, it's written. On Yom Kippur, it's sealed. And then all of these 99 ways to die. Right? So the first thing that I want to just put up there is remember we're going to look at the translation, and I mean no judgments on the translator or the translators of this Machzor. And if you were to look at other Machzors, you'd see different translations as well. So instead, what I want to guide us with is the reminder that a translation is a form of interpretation, and that the person who's translating that way has some sort of reason for translating it that way. The same way that when I'm going to say, I think we should translate some of these words differently, it's because I'm working towards a different interpretation. So I'm putting that out there as the disclaimer. Anybody who comes late didn't hear it, and you're missing out. But I do think that that's an important thing to hold on to, because otherwise, every book would translate the same thing, and every Machzor would have the same translation of all these words. And I think part of the richness of our tradition is that these words can be translated multiple ways. So that's what we're going to look at tonight. The literary device that sort of guides us is this ayin bet resh, the Hebrew root of avar, which means to pass or to change. And if you look here, we have this word ya'avrun, ma'avir, ta'avir, ya'avrun. Again, this ayin bet resh, ayin bet resh, ayin bet resh, and all of these words. And does anybody know what the word avar means, or a definition of the word avar? So we have one person who was Avraham ha-Ivri, Abraham the Ivri, which means he was the Ivri because he came from the other side, and he was over, to go over to the other side. Also in Hebrew, we have the word avera, a transgression. In grammar, the word avar means the past. It's the past tense. So really, this word can mean so many things. And for those who are getting a little bit nervous right now, don't worry, this is not a grammar lesson. But what I do want to highlight is that this one word carries so much power to it that really anything is related to sort of transition or change or passing is what we're going to see, some sort of passing from one state to another. And so let's take a look at this paragraph. You see how I just zoomed in? We're looking at where it says here, this part here. We're going to look at this more in depth. So here's where we go, and this is when we get to have some fun. Biblical allusions and Mishnah allusions are used all over the place. And I think that, when they say real estate, what's the most important thing is location.
Location.
Right. And I think the same gets true for biblical or rabbinic poetry, right? It's context, 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 right? Where are the things that they're pulling from? And so we have here the first avar, right? This word right here, the first time it comes up is in this context. Kol ba'e olam ya'avrun lefanecha kivnei maron. All of the inhabitants of the world will pass before you like bnei maron, sons of the mar, or children of the master, right? And again, I want us to sort of ignore this for a second because they translate it like flock of sheep, and it'll understand why they did. We can understand why they did. And if you even look at the Machzor during Yom Kippur, it gives a whole explanation of the geography of the Maron region where it was really good for sheep to be. But if you look at the context within the Mishnah, it really tends to give us a picture of everybody passing by like a king's soldiers. So I'd like to use this translation for this first line. And the reason is because what's the picture that comes to our mind of a king and addressing all of the soldiers? So this is where, what do you guys think of when you hear this picture? The king and the soldiers. Sort of what's the dynamic? How are they standing? Go ahead.
A reviewing stand.
Say more.
A reviewing stand, like the king is sitting there watching all the soldiers go past.
Okay. And is the king like up close next to all of them, or is he more like on the balcony, like looking at everybody all at once?
Let's put the king on the balcony.
Okay, fine. So we've got the king on the balcony. So he's looking at everybody from a distance, right? That he's looking down, and really the only things that he can distinguish then, if we play the analogy out further, maybe this one has like 2 bars on the arm, or this one has a triangle instead of a square on the hat, and this one has a green and this one has a blue, whatever the different things are. But for the most part, the king doesn't really know intimate details about any of these soldiers. The king just sort of surveys the whole crowd and sort of takes everybody in all at once.
But Rabbi,
yeah, please.
The reference to soldiers invokes the idea of power. The reference of sheep invokes the idea of vulnerability.
Yeah, beautiful point. And that's why I think that this one should be translated as king soldiers, because I think it highlights for us that oftentimes those who have power are the most distant from us, right? If you think about it, if you're working in a large corporation, how many times, does the CEO actually know the custodial workers or the administrative assistants, or even the other vice presidents, right? There's sort of this distance that happens. And I think that it highlights too that there might be times in our life where God just feels distant. And that's the first image that's brought up to us on Hine Yom Hadin, right? On this is the day of judgment. And oh, by the way, it's kind of not fair because God doesn't really see you as individuals. He just sort of looks as a whole unit, right? But then, Jerry, you brought up a great point. So let's go on to the very next line of this. Kevakarat ro'eh edro. This one we have a beautiful melody. Kevakarat ro'eh edro. As the shepherd seeks out his flock. And here's where we want this, where is it? Right. That the shepherd who looks at the flock, he knows which one is lost, which one is driven away, right? Strengthen the sick, all of these things. But again, so now, Jerry, let's use this image, right, that we said before, that a shepherd relation to the sheep, vulnerability, right? How else would we describe it? We'll open up to everybody. How else would you describe a shepherd interacting with their sheep?
Responsibility.
Okay, a form of responsibility. Beautiful. What else?
Nurturing,
Protection. Great. What else?
nurturing, taking care of.
Nurturing. Yes. Care. Absolutely. Right. And I might even extend that thought to say, even there's a sense of intimacy, right? That the shepherd knows which sheep eats 2 helpings of grass and which one has 3 helpings of grass, and which one has a little birthmark behind its ear, and which one has thicker wool, and which one has thinner wool, and which one likes to wander off, and which one always follows this one and that, the shepherd knows all of those intimate details, right? And so notice what the poet here did in this line of the, right? So I call this a poem because, that's oftentimes the best prayers are the expressions of the self. And so the poet who wrote this, the author, puts together 2 very, very distinct images from the very beginning. Number 1, king with soldiers, distance, power, no individuality necessarily, right? And the very next line, but oh, by the way, there will be times when God will feel absent, like a king who's just watching over, doesn't even know you from the person next to you in line. And there are other times where this notion of God is so close to us that it feels like a shepherd who is intimately caring for us, who knows to watch each step that we take, to when we're going to get cold, when we're going to wander off the way, guides us back on the path, right? So again, right off the bat, before we can talk about God judging the people and what that means, we have to first grapple with this idea of God, right? And I'm going to leave it open that God can be defined however you want to. I'm just using the word as a placeholder right now, but I think we have to grapple with this notion of God and of this higher presence, this spirit or this power that's overseeing all of everything. And what does that mean that we're about to come in front of that presence? Okay. So we've got the first image, distance, second image, close, and that should be it, right? Because that's basically God is either close or God is far, except the poet introduces a third dimension as well. And this one is where I think even the atheists and the humanists can get involved, can get on board with this idea, that this in Vayikra, in the book of Leviticus, it talks about tithing of the sheep. And to tithe the sheep, it's a very simple process. You line them all up in a line, and you hold out your staff, and the sheep start walking under, and then you count them as they go under. So here's number 1, here's number 2, number 3, right? Maybe this is where the notion of counting sheep comes from, right? Number 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And the one that whatever passes under the rod, notice we have Ma'avir Tzono. And what I really love about this melody that Cantor Jonathan's going to use is he says for the word tachat, it's ta. It's like you can actually get a sense of all the sheep passing under that rod, under the shevet. And you see the words are right here again, passing under the rod. And the 10th is the one that goes to God, right? And that's a little troubling, because if you were to think about the offering that we would want to give, right, what would be your first instinct? Anybody?
You mean like you pick out the one without the blemish?
Sure, right? Pick the best one. That's the one that I want to give to God because I want it to represent the best of my flock, right? Or maybe you're not as kind-hearted and you say, you know what, I'm going to give him the one that's like the weakest and the feeblest, because at least then I still gave a gift to God, but I don't have to lose the best one of my flock, right? But this is saying that's not how it works. You don't search whether it's good or bad. You don't change it, replace it with a different one. It's whichever one is the 10th. And if you know anything about lining up children, I imagine lining up sheep is probably similar, that as soon as you get them all in line and you know which one's going to be the 10th, something happens and this one gets distracted by a butterfly and starts wandering off. And all of a sudden the 8th one becomes the 10th one. And you had no control over that, right? And I think that's part of the reality and the power of this image, is that sometimes in life, things are just the 10th. There's just a sense of randomness, or a sense of You couldn't have predicted it. There's not even a notion of God in this picture either, necessarily. I mean, if you want to go to the place where like God is supreme and rules over all and everything, the ultimate chess player where like every move is calculated, right? This still certainly fits in line with that logic. But for me, I tend to try to come from a more rationalistic place, a little where I'm trying to grapple, like if I can't see a notion of God, then it's tougher for me to actually reconcile that. And I think this poem answers that by saying, sometimes you're not going to have an answer. The answer was, it was the 10th. And this sort of opens up to us that possibility of, why did bad things happen to good people? Why do good things happen to bad people? How come this person merited that? And how come this person didn't merit the other? And the answer is, they were the 10th on that day. And, it's not necessarily going to solve it doesn't necessarily give us the solace that we're looking for, right? It doesn't make it easier to accept, but I think it does sort of give us a framework and a context that it acknowledges that there are going to be some things that we just can't explain in this world as we're going through. And I think that as we present ourselves on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and we're trying to think about the very best versions of ourselves and, all the things that we want to do, and then at a certain point, we're not in control. And that's a really scary thought. And it's very real. And so where we're going to go from here on out is we're going to have this poem instead of I'll tell you about it in a second, but the refrain here of who will live and who will die. I think sometimes we approach this poem with a sense of fear or dread, as though we're praying for our lives. And there's a lot of power to that. And what I would contend now is, through an alternate reading of this poem, another power that we can generate is the power of just being real. The power of not of sort of stripping away all the layers of the onion, all the facade, all the Eleanor Rigby who wears the mask that she keeps at the jar by the door, right? All of those facades that we put on sometimes because we're afraid of how people will see us. I think this poem reminds us that there's a lot of fear and a lot of worry and also a lot of power for just being seen. And so we're going to move forward with that theme. But before I do, are there any questions of how we got here so far? Okay.
My only question is just, it seems like, don't we do a lot of praying that says, I'm sorry for what I didn't do, and I'm, please, my merits, and, it's like all this pleading, and now you're saying it's random. And so it's like, then why bother pleading if it's
yeah, I think that's a great question, because if this were the only text that we saw, then you're right, why bother? It's all random. But it's not the only text we saw, right? We put the 3 lines back to back to back. Sometimes God will be there but distant, kind of like, a parent who's at the park watching the kid on the monkey bars, but you're not actually like holding the kid on the monkey bars, or like you're there and you're watching them, but they're doing their thing. Number 2, that image of God as the shepherd taking care of each individual sheep. And image number 3 of sometimes there's just randomness, right? And I think we need all 3 of those to get a full picture of the reality that many of us experience.
Yeah.
Right? Does that help?
Thank you. Yes.
Sure. Okay. And this is my favorite thought, because when I was 5 years old, I literally thought God was not an actual vending machine like this, but the same philosophy was how God worked, right? My friend is sick, so I look up in the prayer book, I find the prayer for sickness, which is A7. I go, I put in the prayer, and out comes healing, right? That's the very like direct cause and effect notion of God, right? God, I'm nervous about my test. Please help me remember the answers. And then the next day, I remember the answers, right? But at the same time, as we get older and as we get more evolved, the world is so much more complicated than that, right? We know that we had to invest in studying. We know that there had to be medicine involved. We know that, and you can say that all these things still come from God, sure, but the direct causality, right? It doesn't. dear God, I want a job. I want a new job, please. The next day we don't get a new job, right? Like it's not a vending machine that we have this magical formula to push B15 and out comes that thing that we wanted, right? And yet so many of us still hold on to this idea of, but I'm praying for it, so why isn't it happening, right? And I think what it challenges is our notion of prayer also needs to evolve as our thinking evolves. So that's why we're going to have to take a look at some of these books here, right? Because what's being written and what's being sealed. Okay, we have this notion that on Rosh Hashanah it's written, and on Yom Kippur it's sealed. But what? What is written and what is sealed? According to the prayer here, right, we have a traditional understanding, which is what's written and what's sealed. Anybody?
The book of life.
The book of life, right? Yeah. So if the book of life is written on Rosh Hashanah and then it's sealed on Yom Kippur. So here's my challenge with that is, if that were actually the case, then the list of obituaries on 11th of Tishrei should be like 75 pages long, right? Because they were all sealed to die, right? Or perhaps you can say, well, maybe they're like sealed to die, like for the end of the year or anything like that. So I started that question. I said, where are these even books? Where do these idea of books even come from, right? So we found it. This is actually another allusion, and this is why I love looking at this poem, because when we like look at it at the very different layers, there's actually a reference in the Talmud here that the Gemara is having a question. Rabbi Kruspadai said, in the name of Rabbi, or that Rabbi Yochanan said, 3 books are opened on Rosh Hashanah. It says here, Shlosha Sfarim Niftachin beRosh Hashanah. Echad Shel Reshaim Gmurim, 1 for the completely wicked. Echad Shel Tzadikim Gmurim, 1 for the completely righteous. Ve'echad Shel Benonim, and 1 for those who are in between. Now, pause real quick, because I also have heard the book of life, and in all the rest of our liturgy, we have Sefer Chaim, the book of life. It's written. This is like a big thing. But according to the Talmud, what are the 3 books that we have? Take a look at it again. It's not judgments.
What do you mean, the one for wicked people, righteous people, and other?
In between people, right?
Yeah.
Which means that the names that are going into the books, or rather the books themselves, are books of people, not books of judgments, right? It's not the end product that we're talking about. We're talking about the people get written into a book. So there's one book of the completely righteous, all right? And what happens to that book? Let's go on. The Tzadikim Gemurin, the book of the holy righteous. What happens to that? Nichtavin v'nechtamin le'altar l'chayim. It's written and sealed immediately. When did we say this was writing? The 3 books are opened on Rosh Hashanah, and if you're written and sealed immediately, then it means that you were a righteous person. Okay. What about the holy wicked, the Rishaim Gemurim? Nichtavin v'nechtamin le'altar l'mitah. They're written and sealed immediately for death. So what is this whole sealing on Yom Kippur coming from? That's not written in the Gemara. Well, it's not referring to the righteous people, and it's not referring to the wicked people. So maybe it's referring to the middle people. Let's read that part. The Beinonim, those who are in between, Tluyin ve'omdin mirosh Hashanah ve'ad Yom HaKippurim, they're left and suspended in judgment, right, from Rosh Hashanah up until Yom Kippur. And then it says, Zachu, if they merit, Nichtavim l'chaim, they are written for life. Lo Zachu, if they don't merit, Nichtavim l'mitah, they're written for death. Okay, now this is where it's going to get a little bit tough, and we got to use our Gemara cup here. We talked about 3 books are opened. The righteous are written and sealed right away. The wicked are written and sealed right away. And just for review, what happens to the in-between people?
They wait a week and they look at see what's happening. If you're good, then you get into the book of life. And if you're bad, then you get into the book of death.
Right. And when is that book sealed for the in-between people?
Yom
Mila,
Kippur.
According to the Gemara, when is it sealed?
Jerry,
Yom Kippur.
According to the Talmud?
no,
Isn't it after about Shmini Atzeres or right at the end of Sukkot?
So yeah, Rochelle, what you're bringing up is a great point, that according to this Gemara, right, this is the piece of Talmud where that line from the prayer book is taken from. And again, the person who wrote the prayer, the author of that prayer, has a specific goal in mind. But if you look at the original Talmud, it doesn't actually talk about ever being sealed for the in-between people. Right? So then the rabbis start asking this, they say, well, if you don't finish meriting by Yom Kippur, then you have up until Hoshana Rabbah, right? Which is the last day of Chol HaMoed Sukkot, to like really like see if you can earn the merits. And then we sort of like extend it and extend it and extend it, that there's like this sealing really happens later, and it really happens later, and it really happens later. So a couple different thoughts about this Talmud. Number one, maybe it's not applying to this world. Maybe it's talking about the world to come. And so the life that we're experiencing here is sort of irrespective of what we're accounting for in the future world. That's not exactly in line with Jewish theology, right? Because we do have a lot of emphasis in this world. But there is something about, do good in this world so that you can also get merits in the future world. But that's very selfish, right? And that's not a world, it's very self-serving, I guess we could say. So other ideas are maybe this whole like written and sealed is not actually like physical or literal life and death, but think about what it means that a person who's going through the process of doing all of those good things, that's what's called living in the Talmud's mind, in the Talmud's eyes, in the eyes of the rabbis, right? Living a life where you're being thoughtful of others, where you're fixing mistakes, where you're immersed in prayer and introspection and reflection, all that kind of stuff, right? That's real living. So if you can do those things, then you're written for life, not because life is the consequence, right, or the result of your actions, but rather life is the articulation of those actions. What you're doing is what's writing you in the book of life. It's sort of like, I was never really living until I made time for myself, right? That type of thing. When we fill our life with those important things that we know we should be doing, but don't often give time for, that's when we feel alive, right? Think about those times in your own lives. If it's a close connection with family, a time when you were really excited, passionate about a project, and you got to see it all the way through, that's living, that's life, right? Those other times where we, zone out on our phone, and not to say, I'm going to be very clear, I also zone out on my phone, right? But those times where we just zone out, or are just sort of like numb to the world, or just not really aware of our surroundings, is that really life and living? Certainly it's not righteous and wicked. I'm not putting any judgments on that, but I think it's that the prayer, or the Talmud, and I think then the author of the prayer is trying to get us think about of what should our life be like? What should we be doing with our life, right? And that's why I think that we need that sort of end boundary to say, listen, you got to do it by Yom Kippur. Why? Because if you don't, then you'll never do it. Right? If we don't have deadlines, we don't get things done. That's just that you don't have to be. That's like a truth as true as death and taxes, right? It's if without deadlines, stuff wouldn't happen. Some things would, I guess, but I think that the question that this prayer, or that this Talmud, that the author is drawing upon from the Talmud, is what will our life look like in this upcoming year?
Rabbi,
Yes, please.
it seems like the author of the Machzor thinks 2 of those books are empty,
Why would you say that?
and everybody's in the 3rd book.
Or
That's what the author of the Machzoros believes, because we're all.
yes, or
Go on.
or who is the machzor for?
Machzoros for Jews.
Right, but meaning which of these three groups? Perhaps the righteous, the holy righteous, they don't need the machzor because they're already written and sealed. Their Rosh Hashanah is taken care of. The holy wicked, their Rosh Hashanah is already taken care of. But for those who are in the middle, they need the machzor. So the machzor is for the Beinonim.
Well, I would suggest don't assume you're in the holy righteous book.
That's a beautiful.
Don't make that
You're
assumption.
right. Yeah.
And I don't know anybody who looks in the mirror and thinks they're totally evil.
So you know what? I think that that's also a huge part of a huge reflection in reality, that even the most wicked of the wicked probably did at least one good thing in their life, right? They were kind to their parent, or they tipped a server well, or they went out of their way to pick up a friend from the airport or something. I don't know. Like, there must have been at least at one point something, like, for somebody to be absolutely 100% pure evil or 100% pure righteous. You're right. It's a very, very, very high bar to hit. So maybe what the Talmud's saying is everybody should view themselves as though they're, or the author of the poem, I mean, should say everyone should view themselves as though they're that in between. And it's pushing us to say, listen, on Rosh Hashanah it's going to be written, but you're not sealed on Rosh Hashanah, right? And I think that's where then they said, but if you say you're just written and never sealed, then those of us don't hear the warning that we actually need to do something about it. Right? That was a great point. Any other thing before we move on?
I have a question about you could be inscribed for death that has nothing to do with your merit, because there's old age. I mean, people just die. It doesn't mean,
Right. So that's why I think it's not actually talking about physical life and death. I think that, again, because otherwise this would be the vending machine. You look at the end, everyone should be able to keep track, take an accounting of, this year I did 794 good things and 800 bad things. So I guess I'm going to die now. Like, that's not how we experience life. Right. So that's why I want to try to step away from the literal understanding of that. Again, I'm not dismissing it. I still want to take it seriously, but I think that the author of the Unetaneh Tokef prayer and the writers in the Gemara here are trying to say that life and death is bigger than this experience that we just sort of go through on our day-to-day basis.
Byron Sherwin wrote a book that was all about how a person's life is a self-made work of art.
Yeah, I think Heschel says something similar.
And I have it on my bookcase, but I don't have it handy. But
yeah.
And that's what the prayer might be saying. You yourself write yourself in the book of life, or the book, or the other book, based on how you're living your life now. You're either, if you're depressed and you're not taking any part of life, well, that's not a life. But if you're out there living a life to your lights, and then you're creating a life as a work of art. Beautiful.
And by the way, I just realized something. According to the language here, who does the writing is not explicitly mentioned.
Yeah, we do.
I sort of always imagine this, like a judge, sitting writing the books. But you're right, because maybe it is us who write in there, because we do have later in the text the kol chotam yad kol adam bo, right? The signature of each person is in there. So that actually lines up really nicely with another part of the prayer that says that we're the ones who sign up for a year of life, or who sign up for a year of death, right? Based on how we expect our year to be, or how we commit to making our actions. All right.
So there's where the issue of control is. We may not have control over what happens to us, but we have control how we're going to deal with any situation. So that's,
Beautiful. Yeah, excellent. Beautiful point, Rochelle. Thank you. So let's look on to the second half of the poem, because now you're like, okay, but how are you going to fix all this stuff about, you know, all the different ways we can die here. So this is what I wanted to, this is me dating myself a little bit, but there was an ad campaign. I don't know if you remember this.
We all remember this.
I know, I know my
We
audience.
have, this generation is like, yes.
Right. So we've got this question, who will live, who will die, and then what? And the question that I want us to ask is, where's the verb, right? And so let's go ahead and look at the text here, and we've got it. And again, I'm putting the actual translation that we took from this Machzor, and then I'm going to actually show you a way that I translated it literally according to the Hebrew. So the way that they wrote it, we have these first two lines: how many will pass, how many will be created, who will live, who will die. And then it almost seems like the next 5 or 6 lines are responding only to this who will die part, right? It's almost as if this who will live, etc., is like indented. Who will live a long life and who will come to an untimely end? Who will perish by fire? Who will perish by water? Who will perish by sword? Who will perish by beast? Who by hunger? Who by thirst? Who by earthquake? Who by plague? Who will be strangled? Who will be stoned? And then we have a pause, and that's like the end of the who will die section. And this third part is mi yanuach, who will be at peace and who will be troubled, who will be certain, okay? And what doesn't make sense to me, if I'm reading this as like a, you know, as a piece of literature, is why would you change that from here? It's no longer referring to death, right? The who will be at peace is no longer referring to death, right? Which makes me ask the question of, are these necessarily all talking about death? So let's go through and translate this literally. Again, kama ya'avrun v'chama yibareun, how many will pass and how many will be created. And traditionally, we understand this as how many will die and how many will be born. Okay. By the way, notice we have kama ya'avrun, how many will pass. Again, we have that same root, that ayin bet resh. So highlights that the transition or the pivot point between life and death is so thin, which again, if we use our artistic definition of life and death, then to wake ourselves up from death to start living is a very thin line that can happen in a second, right? Living to dying or dying to living. And how many will be created, okay? Mi yichya u mi yamut, who will live and who will die. Now, we no longer here in this middle section, we don't have any verbs. So this is the Wendy's slogan that I put in there. Mi vekitzo literally means who in their proper time. Mi lo vekitzo, who not in their proper time. Now, if we don't have a verb here, so then I understand why the translator would say, well, the most recent verb we have is the word die. So therefore, this middle section must all be referring to death. My argument, though, is if you look at the language of the poetry, it's parallels, right? It's this and it's this. So how many will pass? How many will be created? Who will live? Who will die? And I think that this middle section refers to both of these examples. It refers to the entire line. So again, who will live and continue life in its proper time and who not in its proper time. Now you're like, what does that mean in terms of like living life? So I would think of it as like, maybe we should say it as whose life will unfold in its proper time and whose life will unfold not in its proper time. And now we've got open, and now that gives us actual real life examples, right? I think of an example like Harry Potter. I don't know why that's the first one I said when I said real life examples, but we'll just keep going with it. Right? That Harry Potter was a leader whose leadership became thrust upon him. So we would say that was lo bekitzo. His leadership happened not in its proper time. It was time Harry Potter arise to the leadership role of, be the savior of the magic world, right? But then you also have somebody who works through the ranks of their company and grows and does the education and more practice, and then all of a sudden gets promoted to be vice president. And that happened in the proper time, right? It was through the natural order of things. If we think about whose life unfolds that, you know what, I'm ready to retire now. They step away after having a full career. This is happening a lot of times in education, right? You're seeing it right now, especially with COVID and everything. People were just like, I'm done. I've had a good teaching career. I'm ready to do something else now. So their life happened in the proper time. And then you have others who they say, you know what, this is not the way that I planned it. Or, they get fired, or there's a medical issue, or something happens that like throws us for a loop. And we could say, you know what, that doesn't feel like the proper time. Now, again, the big asterisk behind all of this is we don't know, right? Like I don't know what's proper and what's not the proper time. I know what feels like it to me, but the reality of this poem is stuff is going to happen as it makes sense, and stuff is going to happen as it doesn't make sense. And whether it feels like it was linear and a natural progression, or whether it feels like it just happened haphazardly, that's what's going to happen over the course of the year. Now, here's a fun example, because if you're like, okay, fine. So maybe you're willing to like buy into my translation about this line here, but now we've got who by fire and who by water. So again, I think it refers to the full line. Who will die by fire? Okay, that's an easy example for us, especially, I was in California for the last 4 years in the Bay Area, and this poem made so much more sense. I had a student who lost their home, right? But they didn't die from it, but there were a lot of people who did die from it. So then it begs the question, well, their future was impacted by the fire. So maybe they didn't die by the fire, but they certainly lived by the fire, right? That's a weird formulation. Their life was certainly determined by the fire. Maybe that's a better way of saying it, right? And by the way, now can I open it up here and let's brainstorm a little bit. Who else's life, just in general, you don't have to think of a specific person, but in general, what types of people are going to be, we'll use fire or water. You can give either example. Whose life or whose future is determined either by fire or by water? Go ahead, I'll open it up to everybody.
Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico, the people who live there, right? Their future is determined. Yeah, absolutely. Give us another example. You could think of even just like general professions, like people who work in certain fields.
Fireman, if you're a fireman, so.
Yeah, if you're a fireman, your future is going to be determined by fire. Absolutely. What about some water examples?
Fishermen.
Fishermen, right?
Good.
Their future will be determined by water. Okay. What about Olympic swimmers?
Or sailors. I mean, they're like fishermen, but naval sailors.
Right, people in the Navy, their future is determined by what happens in the water, right?
What about all the people in California who don't have enough water?
Okay, so now you've got people who their future is determined by lack of water or absence of water, right? So that absolutely, right? Flash floods. We know flash floods is the thing. That's happened. It was a couple of years ago. We had the big one, right? But the tsunamis. But I think that this poem goes even bigger than that, right? And I think that's where, on one sense, it's like, it's not just about death anymore. All right, we can take a deep breath and have a sense of calm. But the other flip side is it's also so much more real now, because we're highlighting to every degree that there's so much that's beyond our control that we have to come to some sort of acceptance about all of this. And by the way, we could go even bigger, because it's not just the sailors and the fishermen and I think the Olympic swimmers, right, whose future is determined by water, but also the meteorologist who's covering the storm, or the news anchor who gets their big break, lo bekitzo, not in the proper time because the regular anchor was sick that day and couldn't cover the story about the animal that broke away from the zoo and attacked somebody or whatever. That person's future was also determined by this scenario. All right? And so like when we think about it actually and like really extrapolate it, this poem is talking about reality in such a full degree that it makes us feel so small and insignificant. And that's why we need at the very beginning that you might be tempted to think it's all random and it doesn't matter. Or you might be able to, you might be tempted to think God doesn't really notice us because we're just like soldiers just doing our thing that the king notices from afar and can't distinguish any of us. And that's why we needed that other reminder of, but God also serves as that shepherd to care for us during those times too. So you see how we're like building a progression here and an understanding of not trying to scare ourselves into being better people, which I think does work for some, by the way. And I think that there's a lot of, right, those of us who grew up with this understanding of you have to be better or else, right? It's very powerful. And to think that on Rosh Hashanah, you're like praying for your actual life, I mean, that's a very powerful feeling. But the other way, what we're trying to look at it now is by saying, let's actually try to get in touch with reality. And let's actually pay attention to all those things that we don't really notice, that we don't really think about, okay, earthquake, it's over there. But also Magen David Adom, the Israeli Red Cross, is going to get notoriety and become a public stage because of the work that they did in Haiti. Like that was because of an earth. So it's not just the people who die, it's how many else are impacted by each of these things, right? And by the way, when that happens, so then we have to, then we have to ask the question, and that way it flows very naturally now from this initial question of who will live, who will die, whose future will be determined, and all of these things. And this just becomes the very next question: who's going to rest and who's going to wander? Who's going to have serenity and who's going to be distressed? Who will be calm, who will be tormented? All of those things that we just don't know and we don't understand. But it becomes one long list here of all of the things that we don't know in the year to come. And to me, actually accepting that is really scary and really nerve-wracking. So and by the way, my goal is not to try and scare you into into praying more, but I think that if we can actually let ourselves sort of embrace the power of this prayer for now and really let ourselves be authentic of, you know what, maybe it is time to not only show myself as this super strong person. Let myself be a little vulnerable. Let myself actually say to Hakadosh Baruch Hu, to my creator, to that Hineni, here I really am. And I might have a future that's determined by hunger or by thirst. I might be the one to have an idea to cure a plague, right? Not just those suffering from COVID, but maybe the doctors who are working on trying to find cures, or the people, the volunteers who are giving the booster shots, whatever it is. So many people are affected by all of these things, right? And to really accept that is really daunting and really harrowing, but also really empowering, because then it realizes that I could allow my life to be impacted by all of these if I become more aware to it. So what's the answer? Ta-da! How do we eliminate the evil decree? We go back to the vending machine, right? As long as everybody does tshuva, tefillah, and tzedakah, then there's no more evil, right? Notice we have this again, ma'avirin, ayin bet resh. Again, this verb comes out. Here it's transformation. That's a beautiful translation of that word, because it's sort of like it subverts, or it nullifies almost, right? Or in this case, they said it transforms the evil decree or the harshness of our destiny, right? And again, I want us to step away from the vending machine, because we all know that if I do tshuva, tefillah, and tzedakah, bad stuff is still going to happen, right? Like I've been trying this, but it's not the vending machine that I do this and it eliminates it. So rather, let's take a step back and think about what happens at each of these levels. Okay, if I'm doing teshuvah, actually like fixing mistakes, and I'm doing prayer, tefillah, in the sense of like introspection and reflection, right? So now I'm thinking deeply about myself, and I'm fixing the things that need to be fixed, and I have an eye towards tzedakah, not like charity, the way that we say give a couple of dollars here, but actual tzedek, actual justice in the world, of like thinking through the right way for things to happen. If everybody in society is constantly thinking to themselves about the best way to be, and thinking bigger picture about the best way for things to happen, and thinking about how to fix those mistakes in those areas that we went wrong, what kind of society have we created? It's a society that doesn't have this evil decree existing anymore. It's a society that actually focuses on these three things, as there might be mistakes, there might be bad things, but we're constantly working to try and fix them. And by doing so, that's how you eliminate the evil. So it's not like a one-to-one of I do this and therefore it's eliminated. It's the work that we do in trying to make sure tshuva and tefillah and tzedakah happen on a communal level. That's what eliminates evil from the world, because if everybody is doing it together, right? How are we doing so far? I have about 2 minutes left. I want to try to wrap up here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
Oh, yeah.
I don't think you eliminate the evil decree. I think you read that as you eliminate the evil, the harshness, the negativity out of the future, out of how you perceive the future.
Yeah.
You go back and look at all those potentialities.
Right. It's
You
almost
get-
we
you
remove
get
the
some- you
evil
get
of the decree. The decree may still
You get
exist.
acceptance.
Yeah.
You get more acceptance, and you're more at peace than seeing everything as a negative.
Right. So we don't eliminate the evil decree. We eliminate the evilness of the decree. Right. The decrees are still going on. That's excellent. Fantastic point. And actually that works with the translation too here. Roa hagazera, the evilness of the decree could also work. Yeah. If we go on to the next thing, we have this reference that man is a tzel over. Again, this ayin bet resh, which here it's translated as a passing shadow, an allusion to Psalms that man is like a breath, his days are like a passing shadow. Oh, okay. So if our time here is fleeting, then we want to, if our time is fleeting, then we want to fill it with the most meaningful efforts, the meaningful endeavors. Right, which brings us to the final Mishnah. This is my son's favorite song right now, so I had to be able to put in the example here. And we're going to do one last example of passing, and this is actually talked about on Yom Kippur, that on the day before Yom Kippur, in the morning, they place him in this case is the Kohen Gadol, the high priest. They would put him at the eastern gate, and before him they would pass, again, ma'avirin, the same verb, ayin bet resh. They pass before him all the different animals, the oxen, the rams, the sheep, so that he may know and he may learn all the different animals and become familiar with the service. So this is a very practical, I love this example because one of the things that it highlights is, hey, Kohen, tomorrow you're going to do this service for us. You're going to have to slaughter the ox, you're going to slaughter the ram, you're going to slaughter the sheep. So you want to make sure you know this is the oxen. It has to go during the oxen part of the ceremony. This is the ram. They're going to go to the ram part of the ceremony. And this is the sheep. This is the sheep. And this is what the sheep does at the sheep part of the ceremony. And so if we think about ourselves and what is it actually about on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, so we have these three different images, but if we go back to that first line, Kol ba'e olam ya'avrun lefanecha, all the creatures of the world are going to pass before you. Really what we're asking for is to be seen, to be known. We want to be able to have our Creator see us and become familiar with us and know us on this day. And so in order to do so, we have to bring the most authentic version of ourselves. And I think one of the things that this poem reminds us is put away our illusions of control, our delusions of all those grandeur that the status that we've achieved, and really let ourselves get not in a humiliating way, but in a humbling way, in a way that is not right, that doesn't have all the, I've been using the word, think about all the masks that we wear during the year, the different ways we portray ourselves. Right? I'm this way to this person, I'm this way to this person, I'm this way to this person, and they're all part of me, right? It's not to say that we're not being real, but at the very, very core, to be able to say, you know what? the reason that I'm this way and the reason that I'm this way and the reason I'm this way is motivated by some bigger value in my life, and try to say, this is what's important to me. This is who I am. And so therefore, this is how I'm going to present myself to my maker on Yom Kippur, on Rosh Hashanah. And if I can get to that point where I'm truly in line with my authentic version of myself, that's the first step to being able to write myself for a book of life or for a year of life. Because once I know who I truly am, then I can begin the process of fulfilling and doing all of the things that put me at my best. So I want to wish everybody Shana Tova and Gemar Chatima Tova as we get ready for Yom Kippur. I'll hang out if there are more questions, but I know we have to stop the YouTube recording soon. I wanted to pause here and give us a good sense of conclusion and resolution, that this be a year that we feel that we can actually bring our full selves to davening and to all of our experiences that aren't davening as well.
Amen. Amen. Yasher Koach. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Yasher Koach. Thank you, Rabbi. Looking forward to seeing you next week.